Hi everyone, and welcome to this Institut de l'Énergie Trottier webinar. My name is Laurent Duchamp, and I am a coordinator at the IET. We are very excited to present to you today the final report of the Biomass and Carbon Neutrality project, which has been running at the IET for almost 3 years now, and also the companion Biomass System Perspective Decision Support Tool. Before handing over to Roberta Daguerre, I'd like to introduce her to you briefly. So Roberta Daguerre is a research associate at the IET. She's our biomass specialist. She holds a PhD in wood and bio-based materials engineering from Université Laval. Roberta is leading the Biomass and Carbon Neutrality project, and she is the report's lead author. We are also lucky to have with us Normand Mousseau, scientific director of the IET and co-author of the report. So a few words also about our institute for those of you who don't know it yet. The IET was created in 2013 thanks to an exceptional donation from the Trottier Family Foundation to Polytechnique Montréal. The donation was renewed 2 years ago for another 7 years. And since its creation, the mission of the Institute has been to accelerate energy transformations in Canada by providing scientific insights and strategic guidance to stakeholders. The IET is also concerned with university training and research and with the dissemination of knowledge, both between disciplines, so in research, and also between different sectors of society. So people from research, from the industry, from policy making, we try to make all these people talk together. Some other projects of ours include the Canadian Energy Outlook, now in its 3rd edition, with several reports already published and some more to come. This project models and analyzes trajectories towards carbon neutrality. We also have a project on peak electricity demand and the resilience of the electricity grid. And last example, the IET also co-directs the Energy Modeling Hub together with the Institute for Integrated Energy System at the University of Victoria and the University of Calgary. And this hub is a Canadian reference center for energy modeling. Before we move on to the presentation, please note that during the presentation, you can submit your questions at any time during the Q&A function of the platform, and we'll do our best to answer your question afterwards. And without any more delay, I am handing over to Roberta Daguerre.
Thank you, Laurent. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. So today I'm gonna present the final report and the structure of the first version of the Biomass System Perspective Decision Support Tool that we did as part of the Biomass and Carbon Neutrality project. So this project was done and led by the Institut de l'Énergie Trottier with the support of the Transition Accelerator. So for those who don't know also the Transition Accelerator, it's a pan-Canadian organization that collaborates also with other groups and organizations to create visions of what a socially and economically desirable net zero future would look like for a prosperous and net zero future in Canada. So the funding of this project specifically was done by the Government of Canada through the Environmental Damages Fund, the Climate Action and Awareness Fund, administered by Environment and Climate Change Canada. So there are many persons who participated in this project and in the work that I'll be presenting here today. So I'd like to start by thanking all the members of the group who participated in this project, either in the writing of the report or in the development of the tool. I'd like also to thank Kashika Studio for participating also in this project. And the other persons and organizations who also collaborated at different phases of this project, either by participating in the discussions, in the workshops, and other types of discussions, the forum, or in collaborating for the organization or the reviewing the preliminary versions of the published reports. So in this project, we had different phases. We started first by publishing the preliminary version of the white paper, which was on the current state of biomass in Canada. So in this report, in the white paper, it was about the different resources that are available in Canada and how they are currently used. So this paper was used as a starting point in the discussions to organize different table discussions and workshops, regional workshops across Canada and in the Midterm Forum. So in the regional workshops, all the elements that were proposed and that were discussed during the workshop were published in the report of the workshop discussions that is available on the website of the Institut de Trottier. So all this work it concluded to what we're publishing today also, which is the final report that proposes an evaluation framework for biomass uses, and also the first version of the decision support tool that is also published today. So in the first part of the presentation, I will start by presenting an overview on biomass and Canada's path to net zero, including the impact of biomass use in terms of climate change mitigation, the biogenic emissions tracking in Canada's inventory, and the different types of existing evaluation methods that exist for biomass. And in the second part, I'll present the proposed approach for biomass evaluation and the structure of the decision support tool that is developed, and end with the recommendations. So the first part of this final report was dedicated to present an overview of different studies, methods that are used to either analyze, track, or evaluate biomass uses. So to develop an evaluation framework for biomass, we need to address these factors that make bioenergy and biomass use unique among other types of renewable energy, and are crucial to understand the impact of choices that we make when we develop a new project that aims to use these resources, either for bioenergy or non-energy purposes. So to start with the impact of biomass use. Although biomass use for bioenergy is often assumed to be carbon neutral, it's important to note that biomass resources are diverse, and their end uses also are diverse and disparate in terms of the environmental impact. So biomass use can contribute to climate change mitigation under different circumstances that depend on many factors. For example, it includes the type of biomass that will be used, as well as the location of harvest and its fate in the alternative scenario that is analyzed, and the types of bioproducts that we intend to or will be produced, and the corresponding biomass conversion efficiency in the processes that will be used, and the associated life cycle emissions, as well as the types of fossil fuels or the products that we intend to substitute in the end-use applications and their life cycle emissions. So depending on these factors, can either have a positive or negative mitigation impact. So what I mean by mitigation benefit here is that cumulative GHG emissions that will be obtained by biomass use are lower than from fossil alternatives on a certain timescale, because in the case of biomass, there is subsequent carbon sequestration that happens in the forest. So mitigation benefits from biomass use occur over a certain timescale, and when evaluating whether biomass use provide mitigation benefits, the timescale considered must be defined. So countries report on emissions and removal through the national inventory reports. And how exactly are biogenic emissions accounting for, and what is the current state of emissions in Canada? So I'll start first by saying that in the removals and emissions that are reported in the inventory are different for forestry and agricultural biomass. For biogenic CO2 emissions from forest biomass combustion, for example, for bioenergy, they are included in the Canada's National Inventory Report. So the assumption of carbon neutrality in the inventory context applies only to annual biomass. For example, for annual biomass such as corn crops, the biogenic CO2 emissions from combustion are not reported in the inventory because the carbon will be sequestered in the next growing season. So over the course of a year, the result is almost zero. However, for forest biomass, the situation is more complex because of longer cycles of growth for emissions and sequestration. So these emissions are reported included in the LULUCF sector. However, for non-CO2 biogenic emissions, for example, such as methane, they are reported in the energy and waste sector, depending on if it's used for energy purposes or not. So IPC requires complete coverage of all these sectors, which together, they include the emissions from biomass used for energy purposes at the national level. So what is the current state of emissions of the LUCF sector? So the emissions are presented in the table on the slide for the LUCF total, which includes the forest lands, the croplands, and other types of land uses. So I'll start first with the managed forest. So for managed forest, the sum of removals and emissions and the carbon transfers that are reported in both categories, forest land and harvested wood products, they represent the net annual flux of carbon in the managed forest. So if carbon removals in Canada's managed forest, they remain higher than emissions, including all the emissions from the combustion and decomposition of wood products in a given year, then forests will be a carbon sink in that year. However, in all the time series, forests that are reported in the inventory, forests were classified as a carbon source. And as we can see on the graph that is presented on the right. So the graph shows the emissions from combined forest land, remaining forest land, and the harvested wood products from the inventory. So the emissions that are included in the harvested wood product category, they are due to approximately, here I show for the most recent year in the inventory, so 2023, there were approximately 33% due to the long-lived wood products. So that's all the wood that is used, for example, in construction that reaches the end of its useful life. And 25% it's due to short-lived wood products, and 39% of the emissions in that year was from bioenergy. So on the graph, you can see the harvested wood products net flux, which is in the negative here because it represents the difference between the annual carbon inputs to the harvested wood pool and the annual emissions originating from the disposal or from combustion of wood products. So there are major changes that were made in the LUSF reporting sector in Canada's inventory in the last 2 years that I think are worth mentioning, because it changed the emissions from previous years, but also the way that the reporting is done in the different categories. So I'll go through them, I'll present them briefly. For 2024 inventory, there were recalculations that were made in Canada's National Inventory Report, which had a significant impact on estimated emissions, which was mainly due to a review of the historical harvest areas. So the corrections that were made in 2024 shifted the net emissions of the LUSF sector from being a net carbon sink to a net carbon source through the entire inventory time series. As you can see on this graph, so this graph shows the curve. It's the emissions for the previous approach, so before the 2024, and for the current approach, so that was in the National Inventory Report of 2024. So in 2025 inventory report, there were also major revisions that were made. However, in that year, the revisions did not change the net emissions of the LUSF sector, but they changed the way the emissions are reported between the two categories, forest land and harvested wood product. So more specifically, for the forest land category, in the 2025 National Inventory Report, now it includes also the fluxes of carbon of food products out of the forest ecosystem, so as carbon loss, which is then transferred to the harvested wood product pool as carbon gain. Before the 2025 report, the previous approach included the CO2 removals and emissions due to the decomposition of biomass in the forest ecosystem. So in the reporting of the harvested wood product category, now in the 2025 approach, it represents the difference between the annual carbon inputs to the harvested wood products pool, so as carbon gain, and the annual emissions originating from the disposal and combustion of food products in the given year. So before the 2025, this sector reported the annual gross emissions from the disposal and combustion of harvested wood products. So these changes in 2025 flipped the forest land category from a net sink to a net source, while they simultaneously flipped the harvested wood product category from a gross emission source to being reported as a net gain of carbon storage. So we can see on the graph, so even though the changes in the reporting categories were made, that does not change the net emissions of the sector. So the net emissions of the first sector did not change in the 2025 National Inventory Report compared to the previous approach. Only minor recalculations, I think, were done. So in the objective of these revisions, according to the inventory report, were to improve the comparability of Canada's harvested wood products reporting with other countries, and also capture immediate impact of harvest on carbon stocks, and the important role of harvested wood product as a global carbon store. So here I quote from the National Inventory Report. It was mentioned that emissions and removals reported from the forest sector without the natural disturbance component, but also considering the fluxes of carbon harvested with product category, demonstrate that the Canadian forest sector now acts as a net source of carbon transferred to the atmosphere and to the global waste stream, which is a result of short and long-term impacts of human management, which we can see the net emissions of managed forests presented on the graph. So another major category in the LUCF sector that impact emissions in the LUCF is croplands. So emissions in croplands are impacted by the input of organic carbon in mineral soils. The crop residues contribute to carbon removals in croplands through the carbon input to agricultural soils. So this contribution from crop residues has the highest impact on emissions declared in the sector. In the entire time series of the inventory, croplands have been majorly a net carbon sink. However, exceptionally, in 2022, they were a net source of emissions of 25 megatons, so which was associated with the drought drought that happened in Western Canada. So the weather variations and the drought events in the croplands category have a huge impact on the crop productivity, on the carbon input to soils, and therefore on the emissions that are reported in the sector. So for the LUCF sector, how it is included when tracking Canada's progress towards natural targets, the methodology that is used is unique compared to other sectors. For the LUF sector, we calculate a accounting contribution value. So the accounting contribution is added to Canada's total net GHG emissions to track Canada's progress towards its national targets. So the accounting contribution of LUCF is not equivalent to the total net emissions of the LUCF sector that are reported in the inventory, which I mentioned before, which I just presented. So to estimate the accounting contribution from LUCF, for the managed forest, a reference level accounting methodology is used, and for the other categories in the LUCF, a net-net approach is used for the other categories. So a reference level accounting methodology, it's because emission reductions from managed forests are calculated as the difference between forest emissions in the reporting year and the estimated emissions for that same year that would occur if past management practices continued as business as usual. However, for the net-net approach, it compares emissions of the reporting year to a base year, so 2025. Therefore, for 2022, for the LUCF sector, the accounting contribution was 12 megatons CO2 equivalent, so while the net emissions in LUCF sector reported in the national inventory were 51 megatons. Here I put plus 51 because it was positive, so it was a net source. So in 2022, the total GHG of emissions of Canada, excluding LUCF, were 708 megatons. And by adding the LUCF accounting contribution, which is 12 megatons, Canada's GHG emissions were 720 megatons in 2022. So the accounting contribution, according to the projections that were published, it's expected to remain aquatic of around minus 30 megatons up until 2040. And as for the net emissions of the sector, Canada's most recent projections that are available since February 2025, they show a decrease in emissions to reach negative emissions. As for natural disturbances, even though they are not included in reported emissions, I think it's important to talk about them because of the significant impact that wildfires have on emissions, but also on the communities. So climate change is already affecting biogenic carbon stocks in Canada. And we know that in 2023, Canada's fire season was extreme compared to all the other fire seasons in recent history. For example, from May to July 2023, the wildfires burned around 15 million hectares compared to a nationwide annual average of 2.5 million hectares. And researchers already demonstrated and showed in the studies that the climate change significantly increased the likelihood of the fire season, but also the intensity of fires. So the peak fire weather is more likely to occur. So the study was also done by researchers for Eastern Canada, according to for the 2023 fire season. As for the impact of wildfires on emissions, On this slide, I present the table that shows the total emissions from natural disturbances in the inventory. So the natural disturbance component includes all natural disturbance, so also from insects, not only wildfires. But we can see compared to the previous years, in 2023, the emissions from natural disturbances reach a total of 1,100 megatons. So around 150% higher than the total GHG emissions that are reported in Canada, that are tracked in Canada, not reported. Sorry, so 150% higher than the total GHG emissions in Canada. But the natural disturbance component is tracked but not reported. So in 2025, so for the current fire season, we know now with the fire season that is occurring, we see the estimations that were already published by Copernicus, and that's from the CAMS Global Fire Assimilation System. See that the total emissions for Canada are second only to 2023, now up until to June 2025. So the fire season also is not it did not end yet, and we already see the tendency of the season of being extreme. So what are the types of evaluation methods that are used now to evaluate biomass uses? There are different types of methods that have been developed, either methods, tools, frameworks. And in the final report, we explored the methods that are currently deployed to assess biomass in the context of transition to net zero. So we focus on the methods that include in the evaluation the impact on GHG emissions. So in the report, we have a description of the different types of methods and a discussion of the limitations of different approaches in the context of a transition to net zero. In the presentation today, I won't present all the types of methods that are included in the report. I will talk briefly about the climate mitigation benefit assessment, which can be done either on a project scale or a regional scale. So the existing methods were categorized by either sustainability criteria and standards, or as climate mitigation benefit assessments, or for decision-making support tools, so multi-criteria analysis that are also categorized in either as resource focus or end-use focus. So to evaluate the benefit of a biomass project on GHG emissions, life cycle assessments are often conducted to determine the GHG emissions on all the stages of a life cycle of a bioproduct. So bioproducts can be either biofuels or biomaterials. And here I show the example for the biomaterials, so such as wood that is used in buildings. The LCA assessment, so the LCA can be done either for a certain product, for example, a wood floor, or the entire building, depending on the scope or the objective of the evaluation. And in the studies that uses LCA methodologies, biogenic CO2 can be either included or excluded, depending on the study, on the objective, and the scope of doing the analysis. As for biofuels, the carbon intensity, which is widely used, is also determined through LCA methodology. So the CI values are specific for each project, and they are calculated. There are different models that are developed either in Canada or abroad to calculate carbon intensity. For example, the fuel LCA model of the Government of Canada that is used to determine the CI of fuels also for the GHG policies and programs. And this methodology, the objective is to quantify all emissions that are released during all the life cycle, so starting from the feedstock production until the fuel combustion. So CI values calculations do not account for biogenic CO2 emissions from combustion of biofuels in order to be consistent with the national inventory guidelines and the Government of Canada's policies. So by determining the carbon intensity of biofuels, we can then determine the relative GHG savings that can occur if using these bioproducts to substitute higher intensive products or fossil fuels. So here I show examples of how the environmental benefits are announced for projects. Here it's for bioenergy projects in Canada. So either on their websites or in the announcement of projects. The projects often publish either the carbon intensity of the biofuels or what are the estimated yearly GHG emissions reductions according to a certain production volume. So the approved carbon intensity of biomass projects that are under the clean fuel regulations were published for organizations that agree to disclose the information, and there's a lot of information that is considered confidential, which constitute a barrier to track the CI of existing and new projects in Canada. So using the carbon intensity values in GHG reduction programs and policy favors the production of bioproducts with lower fossil GHG emissions in the supply chain. So, however, there are limits to CI values that currently use because either if you want to determine whether the biomass local resources are used efficiently, or if you want to consider the emissions of biogenic CO2 from biomass combustion. So there are additional information that are needed to be able to estimate the full impact on emissions when you develop a new project that aims to use biomass resources. Right now, for the studies that are done to evaluate the potential on climate change mitigation of using biomass resources in the forest sector on a regional scale, so either on a provincial scale, on a national scale, or for a certain landscape, the methods that are used in the studies often use what is called a systems approach to quantify the net emissions relative to a other baseline, so a forward-looking baseline also, by including biogenic CO2 emissions. So more specifically, to determine if the biomass use has a climate mitigation benefit over a certain timescale, the emissions and removals from three main components are included, either from the forest ecosystems, so all the emissions and removals that occur in the forest ecosystem, the emissions also from harvested wood products that are sent to markets to substitute other products, and the displaced emissions from the substitution of higher intensive products on the markets by bioproducts. Examples of these studies that applied a similar methodology, either for a national, provincial, or local level, are presented in the final report. So, however, here I'll present the main takeaways from these studies that did the climate mitigation benefit assessment more on a regional scale. I say the main takeaways is that it is possible to obtain either positive or negative impact on climate change mitigation by using biomass resources for different bioenergy and bioproduct scenarios. So climate mitigation benefit is determined for a certain time scale. So either we calculate that for on an annual basis or cumulative until, for example, 2050. And obtaining a positive or negative impact, it depends on the location across Canada, even when we use the same types of biomass that are considered residues. For example, here on the graph, I present the graph from a study that was done where they evaluated the use of harvest residues in Canada on the national level by using this methodology. And the results, they depend on many factors. So it depends on where the landscape that is considered, the current energy mix that is used, how much the quantity of residues that was used, and the types of wood products that are sent to market. So the types of bioproducts that are being produced. So after doing this research and discussing with many stakeholders and experts in the domain, we had three main observations. First, there are currently no decision support tool that has a systemic view that integrates the challenges and the opportunities from both the supply and the demand perspective that is publicly available. And second, the climate mitigation benefit of biomass depends on the decisions that are made on each step of this value chain. So starting with the ecosystem management and harvesting through to the conversion processes that are used and the disposal of food products. And third, a system level evaluation would allow to consider the fate of the other fate of the proposed bioproduct or for the biomass resource and for alternative solutions to decarbonize the end use sector for which the bioproduct was intended. So by adopting a biomass system perspective, it shifts the focus from fuel decarbonization to end use decarbonization. So in order to evaluate if a project that aims to use biomass resources, either for energy or non-energy purposes, in the context of transition to net zero, there are three questions that need to be taken into consideration. First, what are the alternative uses of the available resources and what are the trade-offs for the project? Second, what is the project contribution to end-use sector decarbonization and how does it compare to the other alternative solutions? And third, what is the project impact on climate change mitigation? So to be able to answer these questions, indicators are needed from both the supply and the demand side in order to make an informed decision on how to allocate biomass resources for different projects for a net zero future. So to identify the alternatives on the supply side, so alternatives for biomass use, the alternative for biomass use, it can be either business as usual, so just not to use the resources. For example, if it's biomass residues, leave them in the forest if it's logging residues, or dispose in landfills for the wood products, or it can be another conversion project, another conversion for bioenergy, or another type of non-energetic purpose. However, viable alternative should be selected based on the local context, because biomass availability and the conditions that are necessary for project development, they differ from region to region. However, on the end-use demand side, alternative decarbonization also solutions must be identified depending on the sector under consideration. So the benefits of the bioproduct needs to be compared not only to the fossil fuel that it would displace, but also to the alternative choices that are comparable with a net zero future. So after identifying the relevant alternatives for biomass use and end-use sector decarbonization, the impact of different choices must be compared either based on a variety of indicators, either environmental, economic, and social indicators. So regarding the impact on climate mitigation potential, evaluating the impact for a biomass conversion project, as you can see from the results of the different studies that were reviewed, the impact cannot be straightforward. Evaluation cannot be straightforward because of the dynamics of biogenic carbon. So the methodology that researchers use to evaluate the impact depends on the scale of the analysis. Is it on a project scale or on a regional scale? So here, for comparison purposes, various indicators can be used to identify projects that could potentially lead to a better carbon balance. For example, either by having a higher conversion efficiency, or by substituting higher carbon-intensive fossil fuels, or by storing biogenic carbon for a longer period of time in products. As for the concept here, I present the concept of the Biomass System Perspective tool, which is the decision support tool that was designed by integrating the biomass sectors that either produce or transform, so on the supply side, or transform biomass feedstock on the end use side. The integrative structure here enables to identify the potential competition or opportunities for biomass use from the harvest of biomass feedstock to the end use of bioproducts in different sectors. So, and to compare them with bioproducts and with the non-bio alternatives. So more specifically, the Biomass System Perspective tool can be used to identify the possible uses of various biomass resources, or to identify the competing solutions for the end-use decarbonization, and to compare the alternative options based on different indicators, so either efficiency, carbon intensity, and other types of indicators. The first version of the Biomass System Perspective Decision Support tool was developed based on the proposed approach for the evaluation framework that I presented here today. So the BISP tool is developed to support the evaluation of biomass uses in Canada, and it's publicly available, and therefore can serve as a common basis for evidence-based project evaluations. The Biomass System Perspective Decision Support tool, it includes a grid view, so you can either explore by the grid view, and also specific views by section, so either for the supply, products, and end users. As for the indicators that are integrated, in the first version of the BSP Decision Support tool, we selected a couple indicators to integrate them based on their relevance for evaluating biomass uses in the context of transition to net zero, and based on data availability. So the detailed description for the indicators that are integrated in the tool, they are available in the final report, and they are also available in the user guide that is available on the website of the Biomass System Perspective tool. So it's an online tool, and it's available on both the final report and the website. So, because during this project also, we organized multiple regional workshops and a national forum in which we brought together stakeholders and experts from different either academia, government, just community, industrial sectors to discuss about the elements that needs to be considered when we evaluate biomass uses. So here, all the elements that were proposed and discussed during the workshops are available in the workshop synthesis report, which is also published and available on the website of the Institut de l'Énergie Trottier. And I'd like to note that also the indicators that are not covered in the scope of this project, for example, such as economic indicators that are tied to the cost of resources or for the fuel cost of the fuel production, can be further integrated in the tool in future work. So here I'd like to present briefly the structure of the grid view that is included in the DSP online tool. So the grid view, it consists of different sections. So it has the supply side, the end users, the bioproducts, and the non-bio alternative. So the supply is the different types of resources that are either in forestry, agriculture, and urban waste sectors, or in the end use sectors, we also have the different um, for example, buildings, transportations, and the industries. As for the bioproducts and bio alternatives, that are more in the middle of the grid view. So with the structure, we can identify the different conversions that are possible. So conversion of a resource, a biomass resource to a bioproduct, and the different usages. So the usage of a certain product in the end use sector. And in the grid, so it's integrated the conversion technologies and the usage technologies. So conversion technologies, it's such as anaerobic digestion, gasification, pyrolysis. And as the usage technologies, which are, for example, boilers, internal combustion engine, or heat pumps, because it's not only bioproducts, there's also non-bio alternatives. So the list of the conversion and uses technologies that are integrated in the tool, they are accessible from the navigation bar in the tool. So as presented on the slide, that way you can access the list of both conversion technologies and the usage technologies. And on the grid view, we have different colors. So the color code on the grid view, it's an indication of the commercial readiness of the technologies that correspond either for the conversion or for the usage. So the legend is available on the online tool. So you'll find it on the bottom right of the tool. The legend is available and it includes the gray, yellow, and green colors. So gray, which means it's not feasible. So for a certain usage or conversion, what we mean by not feasible is that there's no technology that currently exists that can transform this, convert this bioresource to this certain byproduct. However, a pre-commercial, it can be a technology that is already exists, but didn't reach the commercial readiness. So we define that by either a TRL that was found that was below 8, or if you didn't find the TRL, it was depending on if there's a commercial facility that exists to our knowledge, either in Canada or abroad. So if there's a commercial facility, in that case, it was put in the green category. Here, so an example for example, if we look at the left part of the grid for the conversion part, for a certain conversion, we can have multiple technologies. So for a conversion of food transformation residues for the supply to renewable natural gas, we can have there are two types of technologies that are being developed, so they are integrated in the tool and that can be used for this conversion. For example, here I show in the green box, there's the pyrocatalytic hydrogenation and the gasification and catalytic methanation. So the two types of technologies, it shows here for the indicators that was selected, the value for that indicator. Okay, so another example, which is for the conversion of food transformation residues to biomethanol. So in this case, there's also two types of technologies. And here the technologies are similar, but the difference is that in the second one, there's integration of external hydrogen input in the process, which results in different efficiency values. So depending for the grid view, depending on the indicator that we'd like to compare, we can select and the indicators from the top right and left parts of the grid view as shown on the slide. And here it would show the values that correspond to that indicator. However, on the grid view, the values that are shown correspond to the most optimist value. So for example, for efficiency, the highest efficiency value, for carbon intensity, the lowest. And so it shows the most optimist value on the grid view. But when we pass the cursor of the mouse on that value, it will open the different technologies that are available. And it will show the most optimist value for each technology. However, when you click on that part, either it's the value, for example, for the first technology or the second technology, it will open a page in which we can select the technology to be able to see the different conversion values So the different values that exist in the database, and more detailed information if there's the energy balance, for example, and what the reference is. So here it is possible to have different conversion values for a certain conversion option, so a certain technology. And in the tool, also, we integrated the definition for each indicator. For example, when by passing the mouse cursor over the name of the indicator, it will show what the definition is for the indicator. As for the detailed explanation of the indicators, also it is included in the user guide. So for a certain conversion, let's say here the example is wood transformation residues to renewable diesel, we can have a conversion option and then the different conversion values depending on how many references are included in the tool. We also included examples of conversions. So the conversion examples, they are consist of examples of either existing or announced facilities that can be either in Canada or abroad that uses this type of technology. So for that conversion, and depending on the availability of the data, if we know the yearly production capacity, it's also included and the corresponding year. Another indicator that is included for the conversions is the carbon intensity values. So for carbon intensity, for each conversion, we can see the different values that are included in the database. And these I values are also accessible through the grid view. So for the most optimist view, but when you click on that, you can see also the notes, the methodology that is used, and for which year that was done. So in the tool, we prioritize at first to include the average CI values in Canada. However, when we didn't have the average CI values, if there was, for example, only one project that is being announced for new technologies, we included the CI value for that project. Or in other cases, it can also be a project that is not in Canada. If we did not find in Canada, it can also be in other regions. But that is included, the region and the methodology that is used is included as information right next to the value to be able to compare them, since it cannot be directly comparable without having this information. So there are 5 main sections in this tool: the supply, conversions, products, usage, and the end uses. For the different sections, they are accessible either directly from the main page, and which would open the list of the components that are included in the section. And there, if we are interested in a certain resource, or if we are interested in a certain product that we want to explore to be able to do the analysis, we can go search directly for that product through in the list by using the filters also, if you want to filter by category. So here I'll show an example for the indicators that are included for supply type. For example, if we click on the logging residues. The logging residues, for example, this shows the view that we have for a certain resource. So we included a part for the description of the residues, because especially with biomass resources, sometimes the names can be used a bit interchangeably. So if we say, for example, wood waste, it can mean different types of waste. So we have a description of what we mean exactly, what is included in this category. And the other part of the supply page view is the availability of the resources according to the reference that are available. So the availability is presented either by mass or volume, along with the energy content also estimation. So that's before conversion. And by looking for a certain supply, so here logging residues, we can see what are the different conversion options. So the conversion options are the types of products that can be produced by using that resource, and which technologies can be used also to produce that product. And in that view, we can compare for a certain resource in which we'd like to evaluate the different conversion options to be able to compare the different indicators that are integrated in the tool. So here I show another indicator that is integrated. We added only the data for one type of resource. So it's the category of soil productivity to show the potential impact of biomass harvest. So for this indicator, we'd like to include a synthesis of analysis that will show what is the impact of using the biomass, a certain biomass type on different categories. For example, if we put the soil productivity at we can include what is the impact. Either is it always positive, is it negative, is it specific to the site, and what is the current state of knowledge for that impact. So we can include the references that studied that impact and a synthesis of what we currently know. So that will be included also further in the tool and future work. As for the carbon parity time, it's also another indicator that is integrated in the tool, and the data can be added by a supply type. And here, the data can be more added as a combination for either the type of biomass use, conversion efficiency, and the substituted products. And depending on the different values, we can compare them for a certain value type of resource. As for the view that is specific for a certain conversion, we can here search for certain conversion, so a combination of a supply and a product. So if we continue with the logging residues, let's say we want to see the conversion for the logging residues to renewable diesel as a conversion. So this is the view that would appear in the BSV tool for a certain conversion. So that includes the different conversion efficiency, the values, also the carbon intensity values that correspond to that conversion. And here, by clicking on the certain technology, we can see the different conversion values and the examples that I mentioned before. Now, if we start by a certain type of product, so the biodiesel, for example, here I showed the example for biodiesel it's the main page of that product. It also includes a description and the types of conversion, but also the products has the types of usage, because the product, we can either compare what resources can be used to obtain that product, but the usage options is how that product can be used in the end use sectors. So the indicators are dependent of if we're looking at conversion or usage options. For example, in the usage options, it will be the efficiency of the usage technology and how much the substitution rates would be. And here I'll pass quickly on that one also. We have the last one is the end use sector type of view. In the end use sectors, we included a synthesis of bioproducts and non-biotechnologies that are being developed or that are already used in the sector and that are included for the different end use sector. And this synthesis also included in the report. So to all the examples that I showed here today and more are included in the user guide. So you can go on the page that is accessible from the navigation bar called user guides, and you'll find where to click on download the user guide to be able to download the document that includes instructions on how to navigate across the tool. And here I show the different structure of sections that are included in the user guide. So this online tool is publicly available and can serve as a common basis for evidence-based project evaluations. To access the BSP online tool, here I present the link. So it's the Biomass Perspective Biomass, which is shown in green on the link on the slide, and which can be used to access the online tool. So I'd like to end the presentation by saying what the recommendations are, which are included more in details in the final report. So after this work, we identified many gaps and barriers that limit the evaluation of different biomass uses and the analysis that can be done. So we made the recommendation either to be able to enhance the integration of quality data and analysis, and for actions that go even beyond project analysis that are necessary to ensure that biomass sectors will contribute to the transition to net zero. So our first recommendation is to improve data availability for biomass supply, because studies exploring decarbonization solutions or transition pathways, they include the different types of biomass feedstock. And the accuracy of the analysis depends on the data and the assumptions that are used in the analysis. However, there are different information that lacks and that are hard to track. For example, due to the difference in terminology and that are employed to report biomass supply. For example, if we use the term wood waste, but it refers to sawmill residues and other types of residues. And also there is a lack of data on the emerging feedstocks because now the feedstocks that are mostly used as the wood transformation residues from sawmills that are almost completely used. So there are other emerging feedstock that can also be analyzed when we talk about biomass use for bioenergy, and which are included in the different reports, for example, like the salvage wood and wood from clearing operations and logging residues. So all the different types of feedstock, it's also hard to track the biomass supply in Canada. So to be able to do the analysis, estimations of the available and accessible quantities of each type of feedstock based on recent evidence, it's essential for future analysis to accurately estimate the potential of biomass conversion pathways and to reduce the uncertainties for biomass potential for end-use sector decarbonization. Our second recommendation is to impose transparency in carbon intensity reporting, because the carbon intensity is the main indicator that is used to compare the impact of existing and emerging biofuels on GHG emissions. And this metric is currently used in government programs such as the Clean Fuel Regulations. However, it's hard to track the carbon intensity of projects that are deployed in Canada, since not all the information that is needed is presented, publicly available. So some information is confidential. However, a higher transparency in carbon intensity reporting under either federal and provincial programs is needed to more accurately track the impact of bioenergy and compare different biopathways for biomass use in Canada. Our third recommendation is also to move beyond analysis to action and to be able to put in place measures to ensure that the LUCF sector reaches negative emissions. So to identify and put in place measures that will include that the LUCF sector would act more as a carbon sink and not a carbon source. Because even when excluding the natural disturbance, as I presented here in the presentation today, the sector is a net carbon source for the entire time series of the national inventory. And croplands have historically been a net carbon sink, and they are exceptionally a carbon source, for example, such as 2022. However, emissions from managed forests have been consistently higher than removals, and there are currently no regulatory targets or incentives that drive efforts to reach net zero negative emissions in the sector. So with foreseen increasing demand for biomass feedstock, it's important to have a clear objective for emissions in the sector to ensure that it will evolve in the required direction. And the last recommendation is to establish a biomass strategy that is compatible with Canada's net zero commitment. As currently Canada doesn't have has no strategy for biomass use that sets out a vision for biomass role in reaching net zero emissions in 2050. So the national biomass strategy is needed to reduce uncertainty about the future role of biomass, the demand for bioproducts, and to ensure coherence with Canada's actions and investment in climate objective. So more specifically, it needs to be established on scenarios for biomass use that are compatible with a net zero future and projections of biomass availability in a changing climate. And as concluded through the research in this report, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for biomass use. So the impact of its use from an ecological, social, economic standpoint depends on the local context. However, Canada needs a national biomass strategy based on regional analysis of different scenarios for biomass use across the economy that are compatible with a net zero future and that account for projections of biomass availability in a changing climate. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, either on the final report or on the BSB online tool, please feel free to contact me and to ask me the questions, or also to say any comments or suggestions that you have. I'll be happy to answer your questions now too. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta, for this very rich presentation. There is time for a few questions. So let's start with one referring to actually the map about climate mitigation potential. I think it was around slide 29 or something. So someone is asking, is remarking that the difference from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and the rest of the country is rather extreme. Can you explain a bit more as to why?
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what the conclusion from that study was for these regions. I know that the differences that were seen on a national level for Canada was depending on the different regions because of differences in the energy mix that was used, depending on also two different scenarios of the quantity of logging residues that was used. So it was either constant or not constant quantity. So for example, if it's more than the need that it is for a certain region. It can also replace lower carbon intensive fuels depending on the scenarios that is analyzed. So I would say depending on each region and the assumptions and the type of either the fuels that were used, either if it was for heat, for power, and what it substituted, it resulted in different results in the analysis. Specifically for that region, I cannot say exactly what was the conclusion from the study. However, the studies from that study and from other that apply the same methodology, it showed that there are different, all these factors impacted whether it showed a positive or a negative impact in that region.
Okay, thanks. Let's
hope it answers a little bit.
Okay, the last couple of slides mentioned that the forest sector was a carbon source rather than a sink. Could you show again the graph you presented at the start that show it's been a source in the NIR? Merci. Someone is asking.
To show it again?
Yeah, sure. Show it again.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a while ago.
For which, yeah, for which slide was it? What was the question?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, the graph about the NIR.
I'd like also to note that the presentation will be available and will be sent to all the participants and will be included on the website of the Institut d'Énergie Trottier with the recording also of the webinar. Okay, so for the year 2025, here we have the managed forest. Sorry, for the inventory of 2025, not the year.
And did you say it was actually, it's sort of, the changes for the forest category was compensated exactly by those from the HWP category? Were those kind of swapped, or what happened that in the end it made the overall total similar, I mean, unchanged?
Yeah, the emissions did not change. However, where the emissions are reported and which categories change. So it didn't only affect the forest land categories, but also other categories in which also have a transfer for harvested wood products, but mostly it's the forest land category. So it's exactly the amounts that would be reported as a carbon loss because there was harvest, let's say, okay, if in the forest there was harvest, the harvested wood products will be reported as carbon loss, so as emissions, but then that amount is transferred to the harvested wood products as carbon gain because the emissions are not instantaneous, are not right away, are not emitted right away and not shown in the inventory right away for our products. It depends if it's used for combustion or for long-lived wood products. So for products in which the carbon, biogenic carbon, is stored for a longer period of time, the emissions are not emitted and shown in the report of that year as emissions. So, however, the changes that were made in the National Inventory Report of 2025, so it changed how it is reported between the categories. However, the emissions did not change. That's compared to 2024, where the changes were on the net emissions of the LUCF sector. So it changed the emissions of that sector for the entire time series. So it switched from being a carbon sink to a carbon source. In 2025, it flipped the categories, but however, it did not change the net emissions in that sector.
Okay. Thanks. I'll finish with a last question about future plans. So what are the project is finished, but the tool has just been published. So any future plans for the updates or whatever with this project or the tool?
Yeah, so I think for now, for this project, the project is finished. For the tool, we'd like to continue, of course, updating it, adding data to the BSP tool, and to be able to always keep it updated with the new technologies that are being developed, the new data for the next years. And so we'll continue, of course, working on that to be able to make the tool as useful as possible for all the stakeholders and all the people who will be also using it for future analysis of biomass. However, I don't have any more details specifically of what the next project is, but for sure we're gonna continue working on that tool. And yeah, that's all I can say.
Okay, thank you. Well, time is already up, so we'll stop here. Thank you, Roberta, for sharing all this rich material with us, and thanks everyone for attending. The video will be available shortly on our YouTube channel, and if there are things you missed or if you want to share it, feel free to do so. And the complete report can be accessed already on our website. And that's it. Have a nice day.
Thank you.